Hey, good evening all. Roxy Robinette here to talk to you a little bit about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, also known and better known as ADHD. Let's go ahead and get started. Oh, there we go. What is ADHD? So it is a chronic and serious inattentiveness, hyperactivity, and or impulsiveness. The symptoms are much more severe and occurs more frequently in these students with ADHD than it does in their peers. There are three types of ADHD. The first type is predominantly inattentive. Students often appear to be in a daydream. They often don't hear their teacher's instructions and may have to ask their classmates for help. They might even skip parts of their assignments they don't notice. It's possible they could be taking a test, the paper is front and back, and they don't see the questions on the back side of the paper. And then they often lose things. So, and they might be disrupted. The only reason they might be disrupted is if they're looking for something or asking their classmates for help in looking for something. One thing to note is that with inattentive type of ADHD, they do not move more frequently or more often than their peers. So the second type is predominantly hyperactive ADHD. In this one, they move a lot. So they are impulsive, they act before they think, and they fidget and blurt. So they might pencil tap, they might knock on their desk. Any type, it can be annoying fidgeting or it can be just quiet fidgeting, but possibly distracting to people around them. And blurting, of course, is just saying the answer without raising your hand or waiting your turn. And then for the third type, we have combined type of ADHD. In this case, the student exhibits traits from both of the above types. There are about 6.4 million children diagnosed with ADHD currently, and for every 2.5 boys diagnosed with ADHD, there is one girl diagnosed. So boys are definitely much more often identified as having ADHD. All right, continuing on with what is ADHD. It is also the inability to regulate your attention. So it's not just inattentiveness where they're just not paying attention. It's just they're not capable of being able to pay attention or regulate their attention. This disorder, ADHD, it develops when a student does not develop their executive functions. So let's move on. Let's talk about executive functions here. Executive functions are the ability to carry out the mental activities required to regulate behavior. So there are 4 different types of executive functions. Let's talk a little bit about those. So working memory, that is the ability to remember tasks and what tasks need to be done and how much time it takes to do them. Then we have self-directed speech, and in that case, that's the silent self-talk that we use to get through complex tasks. So I'll be honest, oftentimes I am not, I often don't use silent self-talk, and my coworkers are like, let us know when you need an answer. So then the third type of executive function is control of emotions and motivation. So that is the ability to calm oneself down. And then finally, reconstitution, which is the ability to take skills that you've learned from a variety of settings and then apply them across to different new tasks. So for example, if I am learning to be quiet, or I've learned that I have to be quiet in the classroom, then I can apply that to I have to be quiet in the movie theater and in the school hallways because other people are learning, or people, in the case of movie theater, people are trying to watch a movie. You might be wondering why we just covered executive functions, and that is because most of the academic problems with ADHD are related to it. Okay, moving on. So let's go over the interventions for students. I did put the academic interventions last. Uh, that way, if you're wondering where they are, that's where they are. I just thought that we would spend a little more time on those since they are very much related to what we do. So for the first set of interventions for students would be behavior interventions. So in this case, we might teach time management skills, we might teach them how to plan, and we might teach them some organizational skills. That way, once they learn those, they have a better time of keeping up with things. We also want to use rewards. And I say rewards because we want to reward them for positive behaviors. So if they go for a couple hours without blurring out, they might get a sticker. Just little simple things like that. And then we also want to address possible causes of poor behavior. And that would be external or environmental causes. So you might want your student with ADHD to sit at the front of the room where there are fewer possible distractions, such as whatever's going on with students behind them, or maybe brightly colored bulletin boards or things like that. And then finally, you might allow your student with ADHD to be able to move or stand as needed. That way they get their wheels out and are ready to move on. And then the second intervention for students is parent education. So what needs to happen for parents is they need to be taught how to respond to their child's behavior in home and in public, so that they can be consistent. And it also needs to be used in conjunction with those other interventions. So if you're using behavior interventions at the school, you want to use those same behavior interventions at home or in public. Basically, we're just trying to reinforce what mom and dad are doing and or the teachers are doing. We want to be a cohesive unit for the benefit of the child. Okay, so the next thing that I have is medication. So medication is actually the most common intervention right now. 70% of children with ADHD take medication, and mostly 9 to 12-year-olds take that medication, and it's effective. Medication is effective for about 70% of those. It also works best, like parent education, it works best when it's combined with other interventions. Medication alone isn't going to teach them organizational skills or planning skills. Next, environmental supports. So in this case, you want to look at your classroom arrangements. If you have a lot of mobiles hanging from the ceiling, brightly colored posters on the wall, you might pull some of those down or move them to the back of the room, especially if you're going to place your student with ADHD at the front of the room. You can also use desk carrels. That kind of gives them a privacy screen so that they can't see out and nobody can bother them either. And then next, you want to have clear rules and routines. That way the student knows exactly what he can or cannot do. And then with routine, he knows what to expect each and every day. If for some reason something is going to be different, such as maybe you're going to be absent for the day, or if there's a presentation in the auditorium, a school assembly, then you'll definitely want to give a heads up to the student so that they are aware. And then finally, you can also mix your instruction up so that if there are tedious worksheets, then mix it up to make their school, for the next assignment to have small group activities, something that's interesting to the student so that so they're not just bored the entire time and tune out. All right. Finally, academic interventions. So in this case, when you're lecturing or doing whole group instruction, make sure you emphasize the essential information. I know a lot of it's important, but if you make sure that everybody knows the main ideas. If they don't get the details, at least they get the main ideas. Then you'll also want to list out your directions using Very clear language. So you'll say, first, put your name on your paper. Second, answer the questions on both sides of the paper. Third, turn in your paper to the turn-in box. Then there's also technologies to assist with doing tasks. Another thing you want to do is to break your longer assignments into more manageable chunks. One, so that they don't get overwhelmed, and two, so they don't get bored and tune out and not do it. Then, when you are doing whole group instruction, keep a good pace. You know, if you slow down and get bogged down in details or other things, they'll get bored, tune out, and cause a distraction. All right, and then you also want to build in breaks to move around. So that way they can get the wiggles out and it's at an appropriate time. And finally, give them extra help with staying organized. It is okay to help your students. They won't know this unless you teach them. So make sure you just give them that extra help if they need it. Finally, families of children with ADHD. A diagnosis of ADHD in a child with ADHD is stressful, and it affects all areas of family functioning. So families can actually be strained or even break down, which causes even more stress on the ADHD child and the families. Parent and child relationships can be negatively affected because their parents are exhausted. They have to keep their eye on their child all the time, and relatives may not want to take care of the child because they exhibit difficult behaviors. And finally, even siblings can be stressed. They might feel victimized because of the behaviors their ADHD sibling exhibits toward them. The siblings without ADHD are expected to be a caretaker and maybe watch out for them at school because they are less socially, they act less socially acceptable. And then siblings also report feeling anxious and worried and sad. And then whenever you have interactions with parents yourself, don't blame them for their child's ADHD. And don't blame them for their ADHD, but don't condone bad behavior on the child's part, especially if a parent says he can't help it, because there are interventions that can help the child do better. And then there's also parent training available, and that is learning skills to help improve a child's behavior. And I chose to include it under the families of children with ADHD instead of the education part in the interventions, but it could go either way. And then with parent training, they would learn to give clear, consistent expectations, directions, and limits of what's acceptable. They would create an effective discipline system and then help their child learn from their mistakes, show them the right things to do because they may not know, they don't naturally know, they're learning. So that's a little bit about ADHD. Hope you learned a little bit, and I hope you guys have a great night.